Eustache. Come on up, buddy. Yay. J-Rock. Don't worry, you'll get it. I'll give you through in a second. And Brad Callahan. Come on up. This isn't awkward at all. Well, now you guys know how I feel as the awkward white guy. Okay, so why don't we start with maybe you guys could introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about where you're from, your community, etc., etc. Brad, you want to go first?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brad Callahan. I'm from the Michelle First Nation. We're Iroquois and Cree out in Alberta. I work for the Okanagan Indian Band. I want to recognize we're on the unceded land of the Okanagan people of the Okanagan Indian Band. So thanks us for being here today, and I look forward to answering any questions you guys may have today. And thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Eustache. I'm from Simp First Nation, and I live in a little community called Chuchua. We started building some trails here. We always say 7 years, even though it's probably been about 15. But yeah.
Hi, my name is Jay. I'm just kidding. I just saw some of you guys go, oh no, no. That's it. Augustin Dwana Chakapi Mosturin Nasigasan. Munyal, J. Bearhead, Ned Sigerson, Nihiawak, J. Rock, Ned Sigerson. Good afternoon, everybody. My given name is Grizzly Bear Spirit Walking. My borrowed name is J. Bearhead, and my forced white government name is J. Rock. I live in the stolen territory of Tecumseh-Teshekwemek, located in Chequetmaguluch. Of which I'm honored to be there, and I'm privileged to be there, to be able to live, work, and play. And I will use that privilege to help the people of Chequetmaguluch in a good way.
Okay, perfect. So I think what I'd like to do is kind of start off, as I was saying in my talk, one of the key questions I always get from audiences or even clubs that just call me up is, what can we do? What's the first step we can take? How can we reach out to First Nations and start building relationships? You know, they often talk about, oh, we sent some emails and we didn't get a response. Totally get it, been there myself. I might be one of the people who's not responding. So I want to pass this off to each of you. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about what do you look for in folks who want to partner with your nation, and what kind of advice could you impart? Nice easy one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Been there, done that. You know, every day we get knocks at the door, emails every day, hundreds of them wanting to engage with Okanagan Indian Band. And to be honest with you, a lot of those phone calls, emails never get responded to. And as we know, it's really about building that relationship and knocking on the door and keep knocking on that door and building that relationship and building the trust. The trust doesn't exist with a lot of relationships, especially when it comes to First Nations, and rightfully so, right? And until that trust and that relationship is established, you're probably not gonna move it much, whatever you're trying to accomplish, you're not gonna move forward. But I think, you know, after a while, and you know, a good example is Silver Star here, you know, they have a relationship with Okanagan Indian Band, we have a relationship agreement, but that took time. And it took a lot of time to build that relationship where, you know, both parties are trusting one another. Because at the end of the day, you know, Silver Star is on Okanagan Indian Band territory, and they still use it, practice on it on a day-to-day basis. So it really comes down to building that relationship, that trust, and then really respecting the land at the end of the day, because this is their land. And we always have to remember that, and you know, that would be my advice.
Yeah, just keep sending those emails, phone calls, anything, because like you said, sometimes the capacity in the First Nation might not be there to answer your call. And find someone that if you have to physically go there, find someone you can talk to, like that will talk to you. Get to know the community a bit. That's a key thing. like Patrick said, you keep coming back, keep sending me emails. Did you get to the email? No, yeah, I did. I just didn't respond to it. But yeah, I think finding someone in the community that can relate to what you want to do, I think, is a big thing. And also find not only that, not only what you want to do, but maybe find out something that they need or lacking that you can help with. Because that's a huge one. That's your way in if you can, you know, lend hand doing something else. So yeah.
Ditto. No, I'm just kidding. We have a joke in Indigenous circles of, does anybody actually work at the band office? Because there's never phone call answers or returns or email returns. Yeah, just like Tom said, sometimes it's a capacity thing. The smaller the nation, the less people work in a band office. The larger the nation, the more often that these things that maybe aren't on their radar just kind of get shuffled to the side because they're not as important. But if it keeps coming around and it keeps coming around and it keeps coming around, and we're seeing things in a good, positive way, like what's happening in Sunni territory with their trails, and we're able to show that, it shows a reason for them to all of a sudden be like, oh yeah, okay, this is good for us in some way, whether it's economic or job creation for the nation or bringing in tourism dollars, whatever that looks like. I forgot where I was going.
I'm just put in order.
Okay. Yeah, just keep trying, really. And there's a reason too why us as Indigenous people sometimes are a little wary of non-Indigenous people coming in, right? Just like what Patrick said about treaty rights and land use agreements and stuff like that. You know, treaties have been signed hundreds of years ago, and we're still fighting to have them honored today. So, you know, don't be surprised if we're not, you know, super open or welcoming to these ideas of help or whatever that looks like. It's not you. It's us. It might be both of us, I don't know.
I think the one thing I would add to that, and I tell this to clubs a lot when they call me up, is I always encourage folks to go meet First Nations wherever they are. And that means meeting with them where they might be in terms of their capacity. They might not have an opportunity to really respond to you, so you've got to be kind of patient with that. And I always encourage folks, go to their events. You know, like Aboriginal Day, like you go to their events, just start putting your face out there and people will get to know you. And that's always been one of the biggest advantages I have, is because I just kind of keep going back. But I'm one of the few people who really do. So people get to know me fairly quickly. It's actually a pretty low bar. Like, it actually doesn't take that much. It just takes consistent effort. So I always go to their events. You know, go to, if they have a public open house, go to it. If they have Aboriginal Day events, go to it. If they're having a pulling together canoe ceremony, go. Like, you know, don't, you know, you can usually find out about these things on their websites. Like, there's lots of these things, and it means something when you show up. Because that's one of the biggest issues, is 90% of the time, you know, white folks or non-Indigenous folks walk into these band offices, it's their first time being there, they don't know how to pronounce the name, and they're asking for something. You know, like, don't wait until you need something is probably the most important message I could give. Any questions from the audience? I want this to become more of a back and forth kind of thing. I've got more questions, but I'd love to hear something from you guys. Any questions?
Something easy.
Okay, Peter.
It's not going to be an easy one, unfortunately, Tom. We were just doing, so I was working with Ted Morton from McElhaney. We did some research in developing a trails kind of support strategy for a heritage club in the Coast region, so northern Ulu and Silverbeam. And we talked to recreation clubs and asked them, how do you engage with your local First Nation? Do you have a seat on your board dedicated to your local First Nation? Do you have an agreement where you communicate once a year? Do you have joint events? Do you have Indigenous names on the trails? And the responses we got back were pretty low. There wasn't a lot of engagement. And we went and talked to a bunch of Indigenous communities in the region as well, and said, what about some of these ideas? And Would these be beneficial if we had joint names, all Indigenous names on all of in the trail networks, or Indigenous cultural interpretation in the area, or an event celebrating the local First Nation on the trails in partnership? And some of the nations were not really that interested in some of these kinds of partnerships, because they're like, these trails were built completely without our knowledge, without our support, and we'd rather this trail network just disappears and they just go away. And in other areas, some of the nations were like, this is fantastic, that would be great. And they started, that actually spurred a couple of partnership agreement holders, clubs, they started co-naming their trail networks. So I just wanted to get your sense of how and when those kinds of opportunities for collaborating on existing trails, settler trails, on unceded lands, like how positively is that viewed when those kinds of efforts are made and those kinds of things on those trails, as opposed to a full-scale sort of just let's work with Indigenous communities to build Indigenous trails based on their needs in their community. So I don't know if that's a question specifically, but I sort of just wanted to open up that discussion about how do those kinds of things, naming trails or cultural interpretation, is that like a little Band-Aid on something that just needs to be totally left to Mother Nature, or are these positive kinds of measures that are generally kind of welcome?
I think, like Patrick was saying, it's anything you try to do, it makes a difference. If you're there, showing a presence and doing that trying to get two-way communication, that's huge. And you just got to keep going back and like you're saying, find something that they need. That whether it's they need their youth to go maybe ride or walk trails or what have you, do it that way. Offer something, it's always, I know people live in this fast life where they, want to get stuff done, we have to get this trail done, funding's up, and all that stuff, but if you do the pre-plan and everything, and, get the permission first, and do that all the time. When you're building a trail, say, hey, can we, is this okay? Can you get your people out here to have a look? If there's anything that we're going to be disturbing, and work with it. It's got to be done that way. In our area, that's the way it gets done. We are lucky enough to have enough capacity to do a lot of that stuff. Sometimes it's still really slow. You ask Curtis for Belmont. Sometimes it's slow in getting that permission, but he keeps coming back. And yeah, and we have, I'd like to say we have a pretty good relationship with all the communities in our valley that I live in. But we've made the effort too, because we want to move forward as people and to make our community as healthy as it can be. And whether it's logging industry, mining industry, whatever it happens to be, they have to come and talk to us first. So we make that our priority too, to make sure that we have a good communication with everyone that's in the valley. And our parents grew up in the valley, so they knew there's a lot of long-standing families that live there that they know. So our valley's a little bit different, I think, than a lot of different communities. So yeah.
With those small ones that maybe aren't super open to having that co-work yet, if they look, and if you maybe focus on the ones that are, and they start seeing the positive impacts of what's happening with that other community, oh, these guys are getting more money for whatever it is, they're getting more attention, they're getting people coming around, there's more reconciliation happening, they might start to see that, right, as anything, and start to think about it and be like, oh, okay, maybe this isn't all of a sudden such a bad thing. Some of them, understandably, are very disturbed about the trails going through the systems because of hunting, because of disturbing of the land, maybe unbeknownst to whoever the trail builder was or whoever the the layout person was. Maybe it went through an old sacred site or an old ceremony site of some kind, and stuff got moved around. But I think just keep trying. And for those small communities maybe that aren't super stoked on the idea of having a trail network, start supporting their events or that kind of thing. Like if they're having a gathering, support it in some way. And then all of a sudden it starts to become a reciprocal thing. I think that's a pretty decent way. But I mean, I can't speak for every First Nation or anything, but yeah, I think that'd be okay. Maybe.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is each First Nation is evolving at a different level, and as Jay said, it's a good point. You go to the next neighboring First Nation and they see progress, and it's funny how the First Nations work. They're kind of a little bit of jealousy there, so it's like we want to get on board, with it too. Again, I think OKIB and Silver Star have a great example of a working relationship that they really worked hard on to really define what that relationship looks like, for one, and two, how can they benefit one another? How can they partner with one another to not just betterment of the OKIB people, but also Silver Star? And we're at a point where we're looking at building hotels and economic development up here, helping with the trails, helping making sure the trails are okay, and using the traditional knowledge to build these trails. Because a lot of people don't understand we're gonna run a trail down the middle here, but it's a straight trail, and that'll open up the wolves to run the trail, which will expose the animals down the road, right? So there's different things like that I think everybody can kind of lean upon First Nation or the Indigenous knowledge of the area to really help. And again, it's just trying to forge that relationship. And that what everyone's saying is go to the events, support them, because there's so many times people come to First Nations is just when they want something. We want this, we want this. And let's be honest here, if someone who's knocking on my door and always wanted something, I wouldn't pay a lot of attention to it either, right? It's the people that really want to forge a relationship, understand the history, understand the people, understand that First Nation, that are really gonna prosper. So that's what I would say.
Are you done?
Don?
Yeah, it's okay.
I didn't want to.
No.
Okay. And if you're wondering, can I go to these events? Are they open to the public? Are they closed? If it's on their website, or if it's flyered or postered, it's open. Go, right? Some you have to be invited, and those that know. But otherwise, yeah, just go, support, do whatever you can.
All just amazing answers and great question. I mean, a little long-winded, but.
I don't think it's quite safe.
There was somewhere buried in there. There was, it was implied.
You said storytelling.
It's almost a billable hour.
What I would kind of add to that, and I think actually it was a good example where when I was first going to communities, I was always going with a ton of ideas. So I'd walk in and be like, oh, I think we should do this, and I think we should do this, and how about this, and how about this? And I think, Tom would be like, chill, Sama, chill. And the main thing is I stopped kind of basically trying to propose things for them and trying to impose kind of my idea of what would be a good thing for them to do. And I just started listening. And I know that sounds really kind of trite, but I really did. We started asking, it's like, what do you want? What would you like to see? How can we help you? And that's when communities started opening up. And I think one of the key moments is I was with my friend Thomas, and we were up in the Hatzel First Nation. And I was halfway through doing my usual shtick, my usual, like, oh, these are all these great ideas, and I could tell I was losing the room for the 100th time. And I just stopped, and I closed my computer and said, what do you, look, I like bikes. And I want to help get your kids out on bikes. What can we do? And they started talking. They started opening up and saying, well, we'd like to build a trail up behind us that goes up to a ridge overlooking the nation. We haven't been up there in a really long time. There's good berry picking up there. And they really just started telling us, this is what we want. And now, in a lot of those communities, when we go back, I love seeing how the communities are using the trails in ways we didn't expect. Like in Tom's community, they have the running aunties. Well, the women formed their own running club. The school takes the kids out to do like language training. So because we just really spent that time listening, we found out what they wanted. And once you really show them you're listening, they'll start telling you. they're not shy about it. You know, Tom has no problem telling me what he wants to do with more trails. And that's the key thing. So don't go to them with an expectation. Just go and show them that you're willing to listen and you're willing to adopt to what they want. And that's when really cool projects start to happen. And I think that's where the really special magic occurs. Anyone else? Another question? Okay, right over there. Your hand shot up faster than anybody.
Well, just wondering if you guys can voice any of the benefits you've seen from mountain biking coming into your communities.
In our community, like Patrick is saying, there's a group of ladies that run, and there's about, I don't know, I think there's about 50 in them that go out and run. And I was telling Patrick, I wish I would have took pictures of them when they first started running, because a year later, you know, some of them lost like 40, 50 pounds. Like they're just, you know, just health-wise, and changing what they do. And one of the things, it's funny because they're running all summer, and our health manager promotes it quite a bit. She's a runner, so, and they used to run on the road, and we were saying, I just got run over by somebody going back, probably Patrick. But so I told them, well, we built these trails, why don't you guys run on those? And so they started running on the trails, and then November came along and it started snowing, and I seen Shelly and she said, man, what am I going to do now? I said, what? It's snowing, we can't go out there. But they started snowshoeing on them, so they snowshoe in the winter, and when it gets hard packed enough, if there's not enough snow to snowshoe, they'll walk or run. And yeah, they go up there like 5 o'clock in the morning with headlamps on, and before they go to work, they get a good run in and stuff. So the benefits are there, and also our kids get out and ride. So that's been a benefit there. That's because I'm passionate about riding. I just love it. So we originally built them just to ride ourselves, but it's spread into a bunch of other things. And I think maybe one of the side benefits of I just thinking, but here now, is I get to meet a ton of people from Kamloops all over the world that stop in there our trails. If I'm up there working or I'm up there riding, I meet people from all over the world that are just sitting out on trail forks and said, hey, we thought we'd pop in and ride the trails. And so that's a side benefit there, I think, just getting to know different people and people knowing who we are. Yeah. Nothing.
I guess from an OKIB perspective, through that agreement I spoke about, part of the agreement is every OKIB member has a Silver Star pass to either ski or bike all year round. So everybody takes advantage of that as much as they possibly can if they're into that. I know some council members are up here biking and skiing all the time. So it's really, all about it.
How much people are we talking about?
Say again?
How many people are getting passes at Silver Star?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's 2,100 members in the Okanagan Indian Band First Nation, and I would guess, I think there was about 85 last year. I'm going off the top of my head right now. So 85 passes. I'm sure the Silver Star people would be able to answer it, but I think about 85.
Anyone wants one can get one.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're also expanding into employees, so employees are going to get a discounted pass hopefully going forward. And then participating in the events up here are a big thing for OKIB members, opening, that kind of stuff like that too. Right?
Awesome. Okay, how about right there, the yellow sweater?
Yeah, I was just curious, we're making efforts at reconciliation and reaching out, and capacity is something that keeps coming up on the part of the nation. And is there anything we can help you do to build capacity? Whether that's financial contribution or creating space for that, I'm just curious because I think I could speak for a lot of people in this room saying the last thing we want to do is continue to be more of a burden than we could be.
Good question.
I think capacity comes in all different forms. I mean, monetary is obviously one. I keep thinking about, how do we use in the mountain? I know I've talked to a lot of people since, I've been here, is how do we engage the youth and the OKIB members in the sense of, an Indigenous bike group, a ski group, that kind of stuff, right? So those are a lot of things like, capacity, can look different that way. Ask the First Nation, what do you lack in capacity?
You know, for us right now, one of the simplest things is getting the people up here, is transportation. We have the buses, we have the kids, we have the equipment, you know, we just can't get them up. So capacity can look, you know, many different ways. And reconciliation, I know it's kind of that word everybody's using right now, but really it should be really reconciliation. Like we need action, right? And capacity, I think, could happen in many different ways. It's just a matter of figuring out what that First Nation really could use.
Yeah, for every First Nation is probably different what capacity they would need. And I think a big one is going at it in a way of health, like, you know, pointing out any health benefits that you can derive from mountain biking, hiking, whatever, or getting out. One of the things in our community is getting out back on the land, even though it's only a small area behind our community. Our people now can access that and get out there and walk, and it's a huge thing. Everybody here knows that mountain bike, so when you get out there and you're riding around, you're somewhere else. You're not back at work. You're not anywhere. So I think maybe pointing things like that out, things that you can offer. I think, and you never know. It might be a capacity that you need. So.
I think the capacity thing, I mean, how do you find funding to support a position for somebody maybe to take care of that kind of stuff? Well, I mean, if we're looking at like a full-time or a part-time job, you need to find like 10 to, you know, whatever, thousands of dollars to fund a position for somebody to do this. But if you were to just reach out and be like, hey, I'm in the general community, but I have this bit of time that I can help your community do this, whatever it looks like. I can volunteer my time, or we can get the local bike association to come and help. So then you guys don't really have to put out any money, per se, to allow this to happen, but we can help you. And you're ultimately gonna see the benefit. But if you're asking about capacity as far as like answering emails and phone calls and that kind of thing, I'm not sure what the answer there would be, unless you called and then went running down and answered and went back and talked. That's about the only thing I can think of.
I think one thing I would add on to that is I see you there, Grant. I'll gotcha. When I talk about, this is where it really comes important, is listening to and meeting the community where they're at. I think one of the reasons that, like the IYMBP and Thomas and I working with all these different nations, one of the reasons we have managed to engage with those folks and have successful projects is because we spent a lot of time listening to them, and we figured out what their priorities were, and then basically just tried to work in whatever we were doing to align with those priorities. So a lot of communities, like, they have a recreation officer, like their own kind of recreation coordinator or a youth coordinator, and they're trying to get their kids out, and they are always looking for things to do. So we basically just tapped into that and said, well, we'll show up and we'll train your kids how to build trails. Because they all hire summer students. I'm sure OKIV does this, right? You hire all these summer students, and half the time they can't figure out what to do with them. So we just tapped into that, and we would show up and build trails, and then they started coming to us with more ideas because they knew we would listen and that we would try and help them move towards that. And that's why it's so important. If you go and you're not going and saying, hey, we have this idea, and they're like, that's great, you have an idea that has nothing to do with us, and we don't have time for that. There's always going to be a capacity crunch. Doesn't matter how many people they hire, there's going to be a million things they need to do. So what you need to do as a club is really listen to where they're at and meet them where they're at. And you go back to the question Peter was asking before. It's like, what about like trail names? If you can tap into where the community's at in terms of their language and trying to revitalize their language, they'll respond to that because it's one of their priorities. So it's really about tapping into that. Any other questions? Oh yeah, Grant, you had your hand up.
When we talk about capacity and building the relationships, I find that I've always noticed is we talk about trail building with Indigenous communities and getting the kids out working and building the trails, but one of the biggest barriers that I've experienced and seen is the equipment. How do we How do we participate in a program, a broad program across the province that we can develop and work on that is getting bicycles in the hands of the youth in these communities and building the relationship from the ground up and saying all of a sudden everybody in the band is looking at it and seeing, wow, there's kids riding around on bikes everywhere. We got to find more and more trails with them. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the big barriers that I've always seen. And so I've been, when the whole COVID thing started, I started hoarding bikes and collecting bikes, and because I lost a very good friend, Pat Montani, who ran Bicycles for Humanity, who put over 300,000 bicycles to Africa, to all these different communities in Africa. And how, before he passed away, we were talking about how we could turn the Bicycles for Humanity model into something to help our Indigenous communities within British Columbia. And so, I've been, struggling to find more people to get on board with this type of thing, and I'm very, very interested as I'm entering my semi-retirement phase to put, a good foot forward this way.
And that's a huge issue in a lot of communities of no trust of people. Like you say you're going to do stuff, but you don't. That's one of the things with why Patrick is saying, keep coming back and keep doing the stuff that you said you're going to do, because we already had a lot of people that said they were going to do things and they didn't do it. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where that's reconciliation is such a big word. There's so much behind it and so much that needs to be done. Not even at our personal level, but at the higher level, like the government and all that kind of stuff. I guess one of the big things I hear a lot is, well, I didn't do anything. That was the people before me. That was my ancestors. That was what I'm trying. Yeah, that's great, awesome, love it. But if I steal $1,000 from Patrick and I give it to Thomas, and well, yeah, I guess you're Thomas too. Yeah, Thomas, Tom. Yeah, you guys can split. And they know that it's stolen from Patrick. Do they have a responsibility to make it right with Patrick? Yeah, they do. Even though they didn't actually steal it, I did. They still have a responsibility to make it right with Patrick. And that's where this comes in. Connecting with us, respecting our wishes. Those are small steps that can start the reconciliation process, because we start seeing, oh, you guys are honoring what has been said. You're honoring what you said you would do right now in this moment. That's probably one of the best ways to start it. We're not expecting, I can't speak for everybody, but I don't know, have you guys heard about land back? Have you ever heard the land back movement or that kind of thing? As awesome as that would be for us to have our land back, but our whole land base was North America. That's not going to happen, right? But how do we work together to be able to honor our use and your use of this land? There's a big step in reconciliation right there.
Yeah, for me, it would be just doing something different than what we did in the past. I mean, you look at colonization, you look at the Indian Act. It's really put there to limit Indigenous people, really to eliminate them. If you look at the Indian Act and you look at the treaty, after a while, there's going to be no treaty Indians, because that's what the Act says, right? And until we do something different, and all the funding is really discretionary funding. So from a First Nations perspective, how can you even plan for the future if everything's discretionary? From year to year, you don't know, what transfer payment you're going to get from the government, right? I think the key is self-sufficiency. Being leaders of your First Nation and being self-sufficient, and building it to be self-sufficient, where you're not relying on anybody. Because if you rely on somebody else, how do you control your destiny? You can't. And I always believe that if we could control our destiny, we could provide the capacity and the stuff that First Nations need, because who's better to know than the First Nations themselves? We don't need no government telling us, you know, you need to do it this way, that way, that ship has sailed, right? And I think you look at the most successful First Nations across Canada, it's the ones that are independent, self-governed, right, controlling their own destiny. I think that's the biggest thing, is doing something different. And until we do that, it'll be the same result, right? We can't be sitting there doing the same thing and expect a different result, because we all know what that is. All right, so thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Great answers. Any more questions? We're down to the last few minutes here. In the back there, white shirt.
Yeah, so you were mentioning how a lot of trails were developed with this colonial mentality, and it was this like epiphany moment coming from the Southern US that colonial narrative is the only thing that I've grown up with and seen in trails. So with Indigenous involvement, how does that narrative begin to shift, and what story can you tell of that?
Well, I mean, I'll start on this one, because I mean, for me, it's always about storytelling. Like, what are the stories that we're telling ourselves? Like, those narratives are always there, and they're self-reinforcing. And I think the story that's starting to emerge, and coming from some of the groups that I mentioned earlier who are really putting in the work, you know, the stories that are emerging from that are stories about building relationships, about building relations, about sharing this land. And that's the narrative that's changing. And that's the narrative that hopefully we're going to be passing on to the next generation, is that they grow up with a very different story, or stories that really reinforce the importance of relations, about, you know, maintaining those relationships at all times. I think this is something Tom has really taught me, and it's a story I think is becoming more and more emergent, is every time we step out on the land, you know, before we do that, before we throw our leg over our bike and ride off, we're always thinking about what's the state of our relations. What's the state of our relations with ourselves, with our family, with our community, with the land, and with the animals. And only when those things are all taken care of, that's when we can have those epic rides that we're looking for. And I like to think that's at least the premise of what some of these emerging stories will look like. Thoughts? Jokes? Okay, so we're pretty much down to the last minute. These guys, I hope you're all going to be sticking around for a little bit, and there'll be a lot of chance to ask questions. Just a couple final things that I wanted to mention earlier, but I forgot. But what we're talking about, this stuff is not going away. And I think what Tom was alluding to is reconciliation is not an Indigenous issue. It's a settler problem. It's all of us in this room have to figure out how we can, you know, what it means to be living on this land. How can we become relations? How can we share this land in the way that it was supposed to? And these issues are not going away. The court cases are still coming. There's a really important court case that's going to come out in the next couple of years, the new Chatlat. They're basically going to be building on the Chilcotin case. You know, so Indigenous Rights and Title, it's growing, it's becoming stronger. The future is Indigenous. The future of our sport is Indigenous, and figuring out those relationships. And I know, like, for a lot of clubs, it's, you know, you have limited capacity yourself. Where are you supposed to find the time and the capacity to do these things? But the reality is, the clubs that build those relationships, maintain those relationships, and deal with those issues are the ones that are going to flourish, and those that can't are going to get left behind. And this is where it's important for the mountain bike community, the leadership that's in this room. We need to start providing that guidance, and we need to help people deal with these issues as best they can. And now we have the United Nations, like the DRIPA Act, so the Declaration on Indigenous Rights of Indigenous Peoples here in BC was, you know, passed by the government. I don't think they've done anything to implement it yet. But that's going to increase importance. And that states explicitly that any developments on Indigenous land has to be done with the free, prior, and informed consent of those peoples. So it's going to become more and more and more important. And as much as I deeply respect a lot of the people who work for the government, who've worked for rec sites and trails, and I know they're doing their best, and they want to see great trails happen, and they want to see it happen in a good way, we can't rely on the government to do this. We have to be leading that charge. We have to be pushing this issue. It's up to us. Any final thoughts, guys? Oh, Tom got one.
I think the building relationships is a huge one to remember, because like with Patrick, Thomas, Jay, Martin, I see them and talk to them throughout the year. Like they keep coming back and we keep talking, or we go for a ride or something. You know, we're always communicating. That's why we have a good relationship, because they keep coming back and also offering things. It's not always, you know, geez, you come and speak at the symposium. It's not all stuff like that. It's, you know, it's other things. You want to go for a ride or be near or stop in. And, you know, we make that point of we become friends. We become really close friends. So I think that's a huge one. If you can make that relationship with someone in a community near you, it goes a long ways. And they'll spread it around the community. That's what I do. I'm a big promoter in our community of getting out and being healthy. That's one of the things I love to do. And so yeah, those are my final thoughts.
Just something to help in your journey of hopefully connecting with First Nations communities. Bring something when you go to ask for something. I'm lucky enough that I always carry medicine or something with me. This is kind of like my fancy one, I guess you'd say. But I always have something to give before I ask for something. Even when I go for a ride, I always have a little medicine tag or something. I always give it. I'm just saying thank you. Stay rad.
Okay. All right, I guess that brings it to a conclusion for us. One thing, I got handed a phone, somebody missing a blue iPhone. What is this on the back? Some sort of sticker says 2022. Looks like a bomb. That's kind of Anyways, we have a phone. Someone left a phone in the bathroom. It's right up here. All right, thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, guys. Really insightful, I think very helpful for everyone here to really understand what is needed in order to help develop these relationships and build that trust. And I do have a little gift for you too, by the way. So, thanks for that. Thanks for that.
He's giving it out.
Thank you very much for coming. Anyway, thanks very much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Hey, can I take a picture? Wave, do something funny, whatever.